The Assin North MP, whose election in December last year has been annulled by a Cape Coast High Court, could end up being charged with perjury. Following the ruling Monday morning, the NPP Regional Secretary has filed a complaint with the police CID to investigate James Quayson. The court, presided over by Justice Kwesi did not only annul the results of the 2020 parliamentary election in the Assin North constituency, which was won by Mr. Quayson, but also ordered fresh elections to be conducted in the constituency. The case of the petitioner is that the MP, James Quayson, at the time of filing to contest the election, had not renounced his Canadian citizenship and thus held dual nationality. Richard Kojonyaku was in court and has come through with this report.
55-page judgment in front of a packed court, the judge, Justice Kwesi, said the MP, James Quayson, violated constitutional provisions and other statutory provisions that guide Ghana's elections. Consequently, he cancelled the 2020 parliamentary elections that were conducted in the Assin North constituency and ordered for a fresh election to be conducted. By the court's order, Mr. James Quayson should not hold himself out as the MP for the Assin North. Before the orders of the court, the judge took time to deal with the 4 issues that were set down for trial. On the issue of the capacity of the petitioner to maintain an action against the Assin North MP, the judge said the petitioner had the capacity and the petition was competent as well. The judge accordingly overruled the MP's challenge of the petitioner's capacity. The court explained that its jurisdiction could be invoked in an election petition when the EC conducts a parliamentary election and declares the result of the contest. Thus, he argued the court's jurisdiction was properly invoked. On the second issue on whether or not the EC erred in the discharge of its duties and allowed Mr. James Quayson to file his nominations, the judge also indicated the independence of the EC in the conduct of elections in Ghana was not in doubt, and the court won't interfere in the operations of the EC unless an illegality and an unconstitutionality are being perpetrated by the EC. The third issue on when Article 94(2)A kicks in, the judge said based on the certificate the MP submitted in his affidavit in response to the petition, he only ceased to be a Canadian citizen on November 26, 2020, and not any period before or at the time of filing to contest the elections. The court indicated that the evidence on the face of the certificate destroys the case of the Assin North MP. According to the judge, it would be a bad precedent and a cancerous tumor in Ghana's legal jurisprudence should the court allow that to happen. On the final issue on whether or not the election of the Assin North MP is null and void, the judge said the MP violated the constitutional provisions and other statutory provisions that guide Ghana's elections, and so the elections were null and void. A member of the NDC's legal team, Alex Sebefia, says it was a travesty of justice and the NDC would deal with the case to its logical conclusion. He adds, should there be a by-election, the NDC would still win the seat.
It says you must be a citizen of Ghana. If you are not a citizen of Ghana, you cannot hold certain positions. You cannot hold this position, president, you cannot be a chief of defense staff, etc., etc. And in 94(2), it says you cannot be an MP if you owe allegiance. There's a big difference between allegiance and citizenship. And sometimes they are mutually exclusive. This was never addressed in this case. This is part of the reason we wanted to go to the Supreme Court. And we went and were given certain instructions. And part of the applications we were going to do today was for this matter to be halted, for the Supreme Court to make an adjudication similar to what they did in Zaneto on 94(1) to be done with 94(2) so that we know exactly what the outcome would be with regard to this type of a scenario. Circumvent that and not let the Supreme Court have its say, we think is unfortunate. So it's not a question of delay or the election petition. It's a question of what is right. The bottom line is, what did the people of Assin North want? They wanted our candidate to be their representative. So if there is a problem, make sure you take time to actually ensure that truly there had been some problem and therefore he could not. That is not the case. And that is why we are minded at this stage to look at the judgment closely.
The legal rep of the petitioner and NPP's national youth organizer, Henry Nanabuachi, says the judgment is a victory for the rule of law.
We are of the view that this is victory for rule of law. And again, we will be waiting for the Electoral Commission's announcement on when the said by-elections will be conducted. Let me also state that we in the NPP, we believe in the rule of law. We have heard from our friends in the NDC that we are using some technicalities to make sure that the sovereign will of the people of Asin North will be thwarted. This is false, malicious attempt by the NDC to render our rule of law ineffective, but it is not going to work. Now, I said the last time that the same law that found Honorable Adamu Sakande as not eligible to be Member of Parliament for Boku Central is the same law applicable as we speak.
The matter that was before the High Court was of a civil nature, and thus the court awarded a cost of 40,000 Ghana cedis against the Asin North MP, 30,000 Ghana cedis to the petitioner, and 10,000 Ghana cedis to the Electoral Commission. Reporting from the Cape Coast High Court for Joy News, Richard Kwejenyako.
We'll be getting more on the case filed by the NPP Regional Secretary of the NPP Regional Secretary asking the police CID to charge or investigate the Asin North MP for perjury from our correspondent Richard Kwejenyako. He'll be joining us in a bit. We also have political scientist Dr. Dusu, who will be telling us the implications of this ruling. But let's go to Parliament now, where the Minority Leader Haruna Iddrisu has described as a travesty of justice the ruling by the Cape Coast High Court annulling the outcome of the 2020 parliamentary election in Asin North. He claims it is an attempt to use the courts to determine the balance of power in Parliament, adding that the judge erred. Addressing a media briefing in Parliament House, Mr. Iddrisu warned cooperation will suffer because of what has happened.
We in the minority remain unshaken. We are confident that it is our seat, it will remain our seat. Our first is to use the same legal processes and legal forum and opportunities available within the Constitution. We will contest the ruling. The judge erred both in law and in fact. It's a travesty of justice. But what is worrying, we don't want to believe that the courts of Ghana have been captured and that the courts of Ghana have become forums being used surreptitiously to tilt the balance of power. We are equal, 137, 137. What is happening is the courts now being used to tilt the balance of power and to weaken time-tested historical notion of checks and balances. Justice must not only be done, but must manifestly and undoubtedly be seen to be done. What happened this morning in Cape Coast, we are told that even when the Supreme Court of Ghana directed the Honorable Quayson and his legal team to go and file appropriate legal motions for the matter to be referred to the Supreme Court, he was denied that. That is repugnant and an affront to his right to a fair trial guaranteed under Article 19 of the 1992 Constitution. Danger begets our democracy with the developments happening. But as I've assured you, we remain unshaken, we remain very resolved, and cooperation will suffer.
But Majority Chief Whip in Parliament, Frank Anodon, says the ruling vindicates the NPP's position, adding that James Quayson was not validly elected. He says the minority leader's claims that there is an attempt to alter the balance of power in Parliament is unfortunate. He dismisses the minority leader's warning that cooperation in the House will suffer.
As members of the majority, raise issue of eligibility related to the Asin North Member of Parliament elect then. If you recall, there were dramatic representation even from our side. And we had cautioned the implication of that decision for the member to sit in and be part of that decision-making on that day. Each one of you will bear witness. And so today, we have been vindicated because from day one, we had made our point abundantly clear that the member was invalidly elected. And lo and behold, a court of proper jurisdiction has come to make a ruling. Now, I respect the minority leader, but for him to say that rubbing in government influence and the likes is totally flawed and should be rejected ab initio. We think that if you look at the provisions in our law, the pieces of legislation as well applied, Article 94(2), Section 92 of the Representation Act, and then the Canadian Citizen Act, all put together, were the anchor of the ruling from the court. Now, be it as it may, any law-abiding citizen, when there is a court ruling and you don't agree in law, you need to file a review or go for an appeal. Don't bring in the executive. We have built our country to the extent that we need to respect separation of powers, because the honorable minority leader is part of the legislative arm of government, and the court is part of the judiciary. So if there is a court ruling and you don't agree, you go and appeal. You don't organize a press conference on the spur of the moment and start throwing jabs at the executives. I think they are getting confused, and I can understand them. It has blown them off their feet. But for us, it has only justified our claim at the initial stage.
Right, so we already know that the Central Regional Secretary of the NPP has filed an official complaint with the police CID for the Assin North MP to be investigated. But the NPP MP for Otafu, Vincent Asifua, says the embattled MP for Assin North should face the full rigors of the law for voting in the speakership election on the dawn of January 7, even after a Cape Coast court nullified his victory. He says there should be a repeat of the instance where former Boku MP Adamu Sakande was sent to jail. Despite opposition from the NPP, Mr. Quayson voted in the election that brought in Aban Bagbing as speaker. Mr. Asifua says Mr. Quayson disrespected the court when he cast that vote.
The minority at the time quoted Article 105 of the 1992 Constitution to us, saying that he should be allowed to vote because he's more than 18 and can think for himself and suffer the consequences thereof. And these comments was made by no other person than the Honorable Haruna Dusu and Muntaka. A certain kind of decision that elected the Honorable Aban Babin. So my point is, the Honorable Assin North MP has brought this upon himself. I am charging the New Patriotic Party and every person who is interested in this case to take the proper procedures, not to create a room for the Honorable Assin North MP to be able to contest again, because if there is not a trigger of a criminal investigation against him, he is likely or probably legally allowed to vote or else will contest for that election. And so after that, maybe there should be a replica of what happened with the Sakande case, whereby knowingly you know that you are flouting the laws of this country, even when you have been cautioned, you have been advised on the floor of Parliament. The representatives of the Ghanaian people advised that because of the court injunction and the court declaration that you cannot hold yourself as a member of Parliament.
Now, Richard Kojoyako joins me with the details about the case filed by the NPP Regional Secretary of the NPP. Now, tell us more about this case filed by the NPP Regional Secretary with the CID.
So Israel, he says that he files this in his personal capacity as a citizen of Ghana.
All right.
To petition the office of the CID to conduct formal criminal investigation into the conduct of Mr. James Quayson, the Member of Parliament for Assin North constituency in the Central Region. He says that it would be recalled that following the just ended general elections conducted by the Electoral Commission of Ghana, Mr. Quayson filed this nomination forms to contest the position of a Member of Parliament for the Assin North constituency when the Electoral Commission opened nominations between 5th to 9th October 2020. He says, as part of the nomination forms, Mr. Quayson signed a statutory declaration under Part 4 of the forms. Mr. James Quayson appended his signature before a judicial officer that he did not owe allegiance to any country other than Ghana at a time when he was fully aware that, as a matter of fact, he owed allegiance to Canada at that material time of making the said statutory declaration. And he also brings in another one that it is also interesting to note that in his quest to acquire a Ghanaian passport on the 30th of July 2019, Mr. Quayson was asked whether he held a dual citizenship, but he answered in the negative, when in fact at that time of filling the said Ghanaian passport application forms, he was holding on to the Canadian citizen. So he had tagged the renunciation certificate to Mr. Quayson, his Canadian citizenship, and that of Ghana. And so he's praying that the Criminal Investigations Department will investigate and charge him for perjury because he lied on oath.
All right, what has been the reaction of the constituents?
Well, interestingly, and surprisingly, the constituents, when we sent our microphones there, they did not want to speak. In fact, you pull out the mic and they will tell you that, well, we do not want to say anything about this case. Interestingly, this is different from when the interlocutory injunction was being sought at the Cape Coast High Court on the 6th of January, when a lot of these residents came to the Cape Coast High Court, chanted war songs, and then sang, danced, and then hooted at the people they would want to hoot. But today, as if by any convention or something, they would not want to say anything or beat a word about the judgment that has been given. You remember that when the Central Regional Minister went to the Assin area, the chiefs of that particular traditional area indicated to the regional minister that they would want peace to prevail. And so if by any provision, the Assin North MP, James Quayson, would be allowed the peace of mind to serve as the MP, they should do so. But if there is any wrong that is done, they should hasten or they should quicken the pace, and then so that they could get a new member of parliament who will represent them.
All right. Now, Richard, one of the outcomes of this case is that a fresh parliamentary election will have to be conducted. I'll come to you in a bit for you to tell us how this constituency has voted in the past and to see if we could tell the way they're likely to vote. But joining us also is Dr. Ali Dusu, who is a senior lecturer at the Political Science Department of the University of Ghana. Now, the minority claims the ruling is an attempt to use the courts to determine the balance of power in Parliament. Do you agree with him? Even though, yes, if it turns out, as it stands now, that they're saying North MP has to get out of Parliament.
Thank you so much. I think the outcome, if it's going to be a by-election, could actually have the capacity or the tendency to change the balance of power. I think the control of the legislature is very, very important. If you look at the history of the Fourth Republic, this is the first time we have had a kind of hung parliament. And that particular composition affects government's ability to conduct its business the way it should have had in the past when it had majority control of the legislature. So the outcome of this particular decision could likely change the composition of parliament. One, if you look at historical from 1996, the NPP has won the seat, I think 4 times, and the NDC has won the seat 3 times. If you look at the last year's election, the incumbent actually lost a little bit of vote. There was a skirt and blouse. So I think it was a serious indictment on the performance of the incumbent because His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo won by a slim margin at the presidential level. And then the incumbent MP lost to this particular candidate, the current NDC parliamentary candidate. So it suggested that people had issues with him as a candidate, but there were also a lot of issues that has to do with the way the campaign was organized and the party, NPP as a political party. But moving forward, if we're going to have a by-election, you are looking at the entire state machinery zoning into that particular constituency. And that is going to have a lot of effect. You are going to look at the constituencies were complaining of poor roads and other developmental infrastructure within the constituency. You are likely going to see that a lot of these things are going to be improved within the short period of time. Government machinery, the entire government machinery is going to descend on the constituency, and you are likely going to see an unprecedented kind of primaries.
All right, but
by elections happening. One, it's not only going to change the composition of government on test here. This is the first by-election we're going to have at a very crucial time. If government loses again, the credibility and the popularity of government is going to suffer a huge dent. So I think government is going to do everything to make sure they win. And we are likely going to see a serious test case of what? The Vigilantism Act that was passed, and whether those vigilantism will be a mark of that by-election, and what is going to happen moving forward.
All right, essentially you're believing that we're likely to see another Ayawaso Central, or it could come into play in any by-election that comes up in Asin Central.
Yes, especially looking at how crucial this by-election is. There's a likelihood that we're going to see a little bit of violence, or at a magnitude that we cannot foresee. And I believe that if the entire state machinery descends there, there's going to be a little bit of chaos. And if care is not taken, we may see a repeat of what happened at Ayawaso West Wagon, because of the fact that the stakes are going to be very, very high. If you look at the particular candidate, the NPP's candidate that lost, if you're going to go all out free of intimidation, there's a likelihood that the incumbent MP can win. But if things are going to go that way, the NPP will fight tooth and nail to redeem the integrity of the government and to reassure the people that government is there for them by bringing in a lot of development projects that they didn't get in the run-up to the 2020 election.
All right. Oh, unfortunately, we're having a challenge.
The campaign machine will be oiled at all cost.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ali Dusu, who is a political scientist with the University of Ghana. But I have Richard Kojo-Nyako on with us still. So, Richard, we know that it's likely to be a by-election. How has this constituency voted in the past, and what does it look like?
Well, so this is the Asin North constituency. In fact, it was part of the bigger constituency that Kennedy Japan won in 2000. So Kennedy Japan won the old Asin North constituency in 2000, won it in 2004, and then subsequently won it in 2008. In 2012, there was a split of that constituency. So we got Asin Central and Asin North. So Kennedy Japan held the Asin Central, and that is why he is currently the Asin Central MP. So 2012, it was won by the NDC, Juan Ambre, and then Abna Drua of the NPP won it subsequently in 2016, and then in 2020, Mr. James Quayson won it in the just ended election. But if you look at the dynamics, this constituency is a predominantly a farming community, constituency. What they mainly do is to farm it. They also have some settler farmers who are also there. But Mr. Quayson came from the biggest town in that constituency, the constituency capital, Asin Breku. So the conversation I've had around this is that the NPP is likely to choose someone from Asin Breku, because that is why when people go there to interview the resident after this judgment, they are willing to say anything. There are two views to this. Others feel that the man has been treated unfairly. He was loved by the constituent. He contested the elections and won it fairly and squarely. And so why don't you allow him to go ahead? The others also feel that, well, the vehicle upon which he traveled to Parliament was faulty. And so let's have a fresh election, and then let's see who actually wins. And so we are looking at these two dynamics. As as Ali Dusu indicated, it's going to be a very tough battle because the differences, even in the 2020 election, was not that much, 54% as to 48 or 47%. So it's not that much. So it's going to be a very tough battle or a by-election.
All right, thank you very much, Richard Kojo Nyako. So, as he was saying, in the 2020 election in December last year, this was the outcome. Abna Drua Mensah, she of the NPP, she obtained 14,193 votes, whilst James Quayson won with 17,498. It's a difference of about 3,200 votes there. And so the NPP, to win this, they would have to do better than that. But then the other thing to look out for is whether the voters will be turning out in their numbers as they did in December 2020. We'll be bringing you more analysis on this. You're watching Joy News Prime.